Swing and Java's graphical user interface. So, have you done much user interface programming up to now? No, no. Yes, no, some, yes. Okay, so um, the whole user interface thing is actually fairly complex. Because the kind of considerations that you have to deal with are about the user experience, and the user experience can make a lot of difference in how things kind of work. I think you've all had experience with a lousy interface, whether it's on the web or a desktop application. Um, just even minor things like when and since my computing goes back to the punch card era, it's actually, just sort of I was reminded if you remember in that linked list example that I kind of showed, it kind of brought back some memory. The very first linked list that I ever wrote was in Java back in the 1970s, not Java, in Fortran, 1970s sort of, and it was like kind of agonizing. Like with object-oriented stuff, it was just so freaking easy. It was anyway. When when text editors first came out. Some of them were not so user-friendly that we kind of, some of the things we get used to. So have you ever been like editing a Word document and you sort of accidentally close it before saving it? So, so what happens? It says, hey, you have unsaved change. Are you sure you want to do this? And so you say, okay, well, no, let me save first. Well, the first text editors didn't do that. So if you accidentally closed it, it's like, you'd be working for an hour, accidentally close it, and boom, you're screwed. So, it's just sort of one little example. Okay, so we've already had a little bit of a peek at this, but we're going to delve into a little bit more. There's the frame, the J frame. That's actually the main window of things. And then these things that go under the term widgets. So it's like, what's a widget? Widget is just some little snippet of thing that as part of the user interface. So, okay, so there's the frame, and then so we'll see there's the J label, which is just the J text field, the J button. Those are the three that we'll look at here. There are a bazillion of these things. And unfortunately, well, as is my wont, the book had one of the nicer presentations of how to do this, but it still wasn't nice enough. So anyway, so it's okay. So instantiating a J-frame, that's how we're going to create one of these things. One of the things that that the book for some reason doesn't quite. They talk about it at some point, but there's the Java Virtual Machine has one graphics thread. For some reason they called it the event queue, and when it is vital that all of the graphics stuff you put on that graphics thread, and that you don't have running somewhere else. Now, for a small program, you can get away with not doing that, but you should always kind of do that. There's a specific way of doing that. I'll show you what that is, and that's the way it should always be done. Now, the book kind of takes you through some of the widgets and skips over the layout managers, but layout managers are kind of important for understanding how to put stuff up, so I want to kind of go through that, and that's where this thing called a J panel is important. So, and the J-frame class is actually incredibly complex, multi-layered, and there's kind of one place you should be putting these things, and for some reason the book doesn't do that always. So anyway, so I'll try not to complain about the book too much. But it's like kind of, who picked that book? I'll fire that guy. Okay, so what is the J-frame? This is the window for all the swing applications. The book has a bit of the history of the thing. You don't have to know about the history, but there are basically kind of three frameworks for doing this. The first was the original one called the AWT, and since that was kind of done in a kind of a crash way, it was literally developed in, I think, weeks. And unfortunately, it showed it. So at the time, though, it was actually revolutionary. What was revolutionary about it is that if you were writing applications for user interface, and when it came out in the 90s, I mean, the user interfaces were fairly standard by then. But if you wanted to write one, the language did not support it. And furthermore, if you wanted to run on different platforms, and at the time there were actually more Unix platforms available. So for example, Sun Microsystems, where Java came from, they were mainly a hardware company, and they had these Unix workstations called Sun workstations, and that's kind of where that was. Windows was very early and crude. I mean, by then this was Windows 95. Have you ever run Windows 95? Well, try not to bash it too much, but and then there was anyway. What was revolutionary about it was that you could write the same code would run on different platforms, including the user stuff. So that's what was different. Up until then, if your application, if you wanted to run on Windows and on Solaris and there were other Unix workstations and all those, you had to write a separate one for each one, which was kind of a pain. Unfortunately, the Abstract Windowing Toolkit, AWT, we kind of dubbed it the awful windowing toolkit because it was kind of awful. And so Swing was the fix for that. And you can kind of read more in the book. You're not responsible for any of that, but just if you want to kind of, it's helpful to kind of know where things come from. So it's like why when you go to save, what's the icon for saving? Yeah, a 3.5-inch floppy disk. When was the last time you used a have you ever seen just even the terms like, butt dialing, where's the dial on your phone? Or hang up? How do you hang up a cell phone? Well, back in the day, they had these little things. You literally hung up. One of the things that we've lost is back in those days you could slam that phone down. You can't do that anymore. You're gonna break your phone. Anyway, so okay. So all your J-frame, this is a very, very complex, multi-layered thing, and there's one layer where you should put all your stuff. It's called the content pane. And the content pane lays things out in something called a border layout. We're gonna see what all those are. There are actually a whole bunch of layout managers, and I'll show you the ones that are, I guess, sort of useful. Now the other thing that we've kind of seen is that when you close a window, typically it's there's like a little X. On Windows, it's on the upper right. On Mac, it's on the upper left. Why? Because whatever they do, we're going to do the opposite. But by default, actually, the default is it kind of hides it, which basically, so the problem is the program keeps running. And so we kind of took a bazooka to it when when we said, okay, if we exit unclosed and we hit that, it's just going to blow it away. Turns out that that's like analogous to accidentally closing your Windows, your Word document before you save your changes. And so what can we do instead? So now that the fact that the fact that Word says you have unsaved changes, do you really want to do that? That doesn't happen by accident. That was something that the programmers put in. And so that's something where if you want a feature like that, you're going to have to put it in. Okay, so sizing and positioning your thing, here the methods are pretty straightforward in terms of their name. So set size, sets the size. The arguments are pixels. So if I set size to 2 integers, they're pixels. There's also an object called a dimension, which you can use instead. I usually just stick to the integer things, but Now the other thing about computer coordinates that you're probably aware of, but it serves reminding, in math classes, if you remember when we were graphing things on the XY, X kind of looked this way, and Y went up. So typically the origin is kind of somewhere in the middle. Come on. So here's your origin, Y goes up, X goes to the right. On computer graphics, so the origin is up here in the northwest corner. X goes this way as normal, but Y, increasing Y, goes downward. Okay, you're all familiar with that, right? And that also holds for the widgets themselves. So if I have so let's say if I have like a little button. So let's say this is something, and I want to position it. I say, okay, put here. The origin of that component is likewise in this upper left corner of the component. So if I want to center a component, then what I typically will have to do is kind of consider the width and the height, sort of take half of that and sort of add and manipulate that. See how that goes. So that can just get a little tricky. Likewise, set location, fairly straightforward. But location uses so remember here we have X go here, so that's how many pixels to the right of the upper left and how many pixels going downward, so the Y heads down. All right, so there are 4 options in closing the J-frame. We said the default was actually hide on close. What happens is it hides it, and the program keeps running. And then if you don't have any, usually it kind of disappears. It's still hanging around, but we have no way of getting it back. There's dispose on close. So what the difference is, instead of just hiding it, it actually gets rid of it, but the program keeps running. There's exit on close that we used because we wanted to make sure the program ended, and that was for the simple case that we were doing, that kind of worked. But that, what you really want is you want user confirmation, and that doesn't happen by itself. So what we actually ultimately want is to literally do nothing on the close, so that separate code is going to actually exit the program if the user agrees. We'll see how to do that tomorrow. Okay, layout managers. Now here's oops, this should be an O. Okay, so the idea is that instead of dealing, every component has a way of uh, laying out the things that you put in it. The content pane of a J-frame uses something called a border layout, and that has 5 areas, and they're called north, south, east, west, and center, and they have a particular way of organizing. So in the content pane by itself, you can only put 5 things. And in each of the different areas, you can only put 1 thing. So how do we get around that? Well, we put another. It's like kind of Russian nesting dolls. You know, there's a thing called a J panel, which is kind of the workhorse for putting things in where we can put more stuff in. And in the J panel, its default layout manager is something called a flow layout. And what a flow layout does is it takes the widgets and just tries to lay them out until it reaches the end, and then it kind of wraps around and keeps wrapping around until you run out of things. Another one is called a grid layout, and when a grid layout is, you can think of it like, like an Excel spreadsheet type of thing, where what it does is you have a fixed number of columns, and actually a variable number of rows, and you just kind of put stuff in and lays it out there. There's a thing called a box layout that we're not going to talk about today, but okay, so what do these things look like? So in the content pane for a J-frame, this is what it looks like. These are the 5 areas. It's the default layout for the content pane. We can actually change that, but my experience is that you usually you don't want to do that. So each of these areas contains exactly 1 component, and they have certain behaviors. So the center, if I put something in the center, and that's actually the default, it will expand in all directions as much as it can. So it kind of stretches. Whereas if I put something in the west, it will expand this way only to the east until it kind of hits something. And likewise, if I put something in the east, it'll expand westward until it hits something. And similarly, if something is in the north, it will kind of push downwards until it can't anymore, and something in the south will kind of push up until it can't anymore. So what this diagram shows is these are all actually J labels. Okay. These are all J labels. And so the J label, this is just one label, and notice I kind of pushed up until it pushed out here until it hit west, and it hit the text of west says, okay, I need this much room to print west, and so center can't push out anymore, and west is kind of pushing back against it, but center always kind of has the advantage. Likewise, it can push up until the height of the text for north prevented it from going any further. And likewise, the height for south prevented it from going, so that's how this works. Okay, so here's the flow layout. And the idea here is that this kind of flows into the next line. So here I created 10, these are 10 J labels. We'll talk about what a J label is in a moment. And so given the size of this, it could only fit 3 of them across. And then the last one, it just kind of centered here. So it just kind of went boom, 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 boom. And then if this were, if you were to say shrink or expand, then it would kind of alter that. Whereas the grid, this is the grid layout. Now the grid layout, in this case, you specify the number of columns. You can specify the number of rows, but it'll add rows as you need them. So here, specified 4 rows. And so when they were added one after the other, they notice how they kind of added there, and then kind of went to here, and then there were no more. So it just kind of. So what it does is, as you add them, in this case they were added one at a time in a for loop, as you can imagine, and so it just sort of lays it out like that. And the advantage of this is that sometimes I want to have things in a specific number of rows, whereas in the flow layout I want, I can have some other things. Okay, so in all of these examples, the contents of these were something called a JLabel. And what is a JLabel? Well, a JLabel is something which is for displaying text. It's not edited. You can't edit it. You can also put images in. Maybe if there's some time toward the end, we can kind of play with images, but that's kind of just eye candy. JLabel it's not editable. It can contain an image, and we can do things like customize the font, the background color, the border, all things. So here, in order to show, by default, it doesn't have a border. So in order to really show this, I had to add those little lines there. I had to add those in as a border for each one of them. And we'll see how to do that. Okay, so that's one way. Now, what's another one? Another one is something called a text field. Now, there are two. Actually, there are three types of widgets for entering text. So the JLabel is just something where you're showing to the user. A text field is something where you can enter a single line of text, and this is something you're very used to. You've seen this. And the different constructors are, I can create just sort of an empty field that'll be kind of whatever size. I can specify how many columns I have, or I can specify in these the field is going to be empty, or I can say, okay, if I give it a string, the field will contain whatever is in that string. And I can combine the last two, and I say I can have a string in the field and have it be this many columns wide. So that's the text field. Okay, so now so far these days when you see a button, it's like that if you click on it, then something's going to happen. So in Swing, it's called a JButton. It responds to the user click. So it's like the graphics piece, like when you click on it, it just kind of, it has a little reaction typically. But by itself, it doesn't do anything. So now, if you click on a button in an application, what does it do? Depends. It's like whoever wrote the application. What did they want it to do? So is there something that Java can figure out what to do if you click a button? And the answer is no, because that's up to the programmer. So how do you make it do something? Well, we're going to have to connect it to something called an action listener. And we'll talk about what this listener idea. This is a really important concept, not just for graphical interfaces, but just sort of as a way of creating, especially simulations. Okay, so now when we run it, we've seen a little example of that. We will typically want to instantiate your JFrame, add some components, connect the components to listeners so that it's live, and then when we run it, we actually want to use this special method called event queue to make sure that it goes on the graphic thread. So I think I have